This is the Halina Paulette electric. This camera was made by the Harkins camera company based in Hong Kong. Harkins made cameras from about 1957 to the beginning of the 21st century. This camera was made around about the late 1960s, so 68, 69. The electric part of its name doesn't refer to the need to power it by electricity, but that it generates its own electricity, by which they mean that it uses a selenium barrier cell meter. This meter is uncoupled, so that once you've taken a EV meter reading on the scale here, you then have to put the settings directly into the camera. When using the camera, the first thing you have to do is set the ASA, or as we might call it, the ISO rating. The ASA runs from 25 through to 400, and this knob here will set the ASA for you. That said, it's rather stiff. I'm going to leave it at 100. Then to use the camera, I need to see what the meter along here is reading. For argument's sake, let's say that it's reading 12. I then move my aperture ring around till 12 is showing in the window here, and that tells me that I can shoot at 125th of a second at f5.6 with 100 ISO film. If I want to change the shutter speed, I can use this ring. If I want to change the aperture, I can use this ring. Focusing is manual, and because of the age of this camera, it's very stiff. As so many of these cameras, I particularly like the depth of field gauge in here. So if I wanted to go for maximum depth of field, I would set the infinity symbol to here on f16, and f16 here would indicate that everything from about 7 feet to infinity would be in focus. So, a quick walk around the controls. We have the meter, as mentioned. We have the shutter release. We have the rewind button here. If you want to rewind the film, you depress the button here, and this will allow you to wind the film back into the cassette. As you can see, it's all falling to bits. On the back, simply we have the camera advance lever, which is quite crude, and at the bottom we have the aforementioned release button here, a tripod socket, and the frame counter. The front of the camera has the selenium barrier cell sensor and the lens. The lens is a 45mm f2.8 lens, which, as I said before, is manually focused with this rather stiff control here. The socket round here is for the electronic flash sync. To open up the camera, I pull this little lever here and the camera pops open. I insert the film, I drag it across, and I feed the film through one of the slots here. Then I manually wind it on, close the shutter, close the back door, and wind on to the first exposure. Although Halina made dozens of different models, from an experiment into 35mm SLR, through compacts, 110 cameras, APS cameras, they were always in the cheap and cheerful end of the market. This particular Halina was rebranded Prince, P-R-I-N-Z, and sold through the Dixon's chain of shops in the 1970s, and I believe my first camera ever was the Prince version of this. I didn't know how the camera worked. I had no idea about shutter speeds or apertures, so basically I just put all the controls in the middle and hoped for the best. It actually kind of worked. And I think in retrospect I was lucky rather than through any skill or foresight on my part. A major problem with these cameras was quality control. A lot of people had difficulty focusing the cameras. That's not to say that they had difficulty focusing the lens, but due to imperfections in the back plate of the camera, which presses the film towards the front of the camera, it just didn't work for a lot of people. You would find that half the frame would be in focus and half the frame would be out of focus. Perhaps the whole frame would be out of focus. And quality control, as I said, it was a real issue for them. That said, they sold a lot of units, and although they weren't particularly good, they were very cheap. So this got a lot of people, such as myself, into photography in the first place. So, the Halina Paulette electric camera.